I still wake up some nights expecting to find myself back in that room. The complete darkness. The silence so thick it feels like a physical presence pressing against your skin. It's been 2 years since I participated in what they called the Extended Sensory Deprivation Study at Marlow Research Institute. But the experience has left permanent marks on my psyche, invisible scars that refuse to fade. Even now, as I write this account, I have every light in my apartment turned on and my TV plays mindless infomercials in the background. Anything to avoid complete silence. Before I tell you what happened in that room, you need to understand who I was before. That person feels like a stranger now. Naive, confident, untouched by the knowledge of what lurks beneath the surface of our reality. I was working on my PhD in cognitive science at Berkeley, specializing in consciousness studies. The irony doesn't escape me. My dissertation was on the neural correlates of subjective experience, how the brain creates our sense of self. I thought I understood consciousness. I didn't know anything. The financial pressure of graduate school was crushing me. My research stipend barely covered rent in the Bay Area, and I'd maxed out my credit cards buying equipment for my lab work. When I saw the posting for research volunteers on the department bulletin board, it seemed like an answer to my prayers. The compensation was almost too good to be true. $8,000 for a 3-week stay in a controlled environment, studying the effects of sensory deprivation on consciousness. They were looking for participants with backgrounds in neuroscience or psychology, people who could accurately document their experiences. The screening process should have been my first warning sign. Most research studies I'd participated in involved a basic health questionnaire and maybe a psychological evaluation. This was different. I spent 2 full days undergoing tests at the Marlow Research Institute, a private facility nestled in the hills outside of San Francisco. The building itself was oddly imposing, all glass and steel but somehow managing to look more like a high-security prison than a research center. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead researcher, had a reputation in the field. She'd published groundbreaking papers on consciousness and perception, but there were rumors about her more recent work. Some colleagues claimed she'd gone off the deep end, pursuing fringe theories about collective consciousness and quantum mind theories. Meeting her in person, I found none of the eccentric qualities I'd expected. She was methodical, precise, and completely convinced of the importance of her work. "The mind is like an ocean," she told me during my initial interview. "What we experience as consciousness is just the surface. We've never explored the depths." She spoke with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable, her dark eyes fixed on mine as if searching for something. This study isn't just about sensory deprivation. It's about understanding what happens when we remove all the distractions that keep us floating on the surface. The battery of tests was extensive. EEG readings, MRI scans, psychological profiles, detailed family history going back 3 generations. They were particularly interested in any history of mental illness, paranormal experiences, or what they called consciousness anomalies, déjà vu, prophetic dreams, unexplained knowing. They took blood samples, genetic screens, even mapped my brain's baseline activity patterns. I signed countless documents, most of which I now realize I should have read more carefully. The other researchers on the team were harder to read. Dr. Marcus Rivera, the neurologist, seemed perpetually distracted, as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. Dr. Emily Walsh, the quantum physicist whose role I couldn't quite understand, would sometimes stop mid-sentence and stare into space for uncomfortable periods. Only Dr. Chen seemed fully present, fully convinced of what they were doing. The preparation phase lasted another 3 days. They taught me techniques for maintaining temporal awareness in the absence of external cues, methods for documenting my experiences mentally when I couldn't write or speak, and practices for maintaining psychological stability in isolation. They explained that the room was designed to create complete sensory deprivation. No light, no sound, carefully controlled temperature and air pressure to minimize physical sensation. "Your mind will try to fill the void," Dr. Chen explained during our final briefing. "This is normal and expected. What we're interested in is what fills that void." She paused, studying my face. Some participants report unusual experiences. Remember, everything you experience in there is valuable data, no matter how strange it might seem. The room itself looked deceptively ordinary at first glance. 15 feet square, white walls, a comfortable bed, a bathroom area separated by a partition and a small table with a chair. The air felt slightly thick, like the atmosphere before a storm. The walls were covered in a material I couldn't quite identify. Not quite fabric, not quite foam. The floor had the same covering, making walking feel slightly unreal, as if the ground wasn't quite solid. They showed me the meal delivery system, a small double-doored chamber in the wall that would allow them to deliver food without letting in light or sound. The emergency button was mounted by the bed, a simple red push button that would immediately end the experiment if pressed. Only use it if absolutely necessary, Dr. Chen stressed. Remember, what you're doing here is important. You're helping us understand something fundamental about human consciousness. Before they sealed me in, Dr. Walsh pulled me aside. Whatever you experience in there, she said quietly, try to remember that your mind isn't just receiving, it's also broadcasting. Before I could ask what she meant, Dr. Chen called her away and it was time to begin. The sealing of the room was a process in itself. Multiple doors closed in sequence, each with its own distinct thud that grew progressively quieter, until the final door sealed with a sound like a drawn-out sigh. Then the lights went out and I experienced true darkness for the first time in my life. Most people think they've experienced darkness, but they haven't. Even at night, there's always some light. Street lamps through curtains, LED displays on electronics, the faint glow around door frames. This was different. This was an absolute absence of light that felt almost solid. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I couldn't see anything at all. The silence was even worse. The room was designed to absorb all sound, even the sounds our bodies make. No echo of breathing. No rustle of movement. No pulse in your ears. The silence had a pressure to it, as if it were actively erasing sound rather than merely absent of it. The first few days were an exercise in adaptation. I tried to maintain a routine, though time quickly became slippery and uncertain. I would wake up, or think I woke up, eat when food arrived, exercise by walking the perimeter of the room, and practice the meditation techniques they'd taught us. I tried to maintain my scientific objectivity, mentally noting my experiences and reactions. The physical effects came first. My eyes constantly tried to adjust to the darkness, creating phantom patterns and flashes of non-existent light. My ears strained for sound until they seemed to buzz with the effort. I became hyper-aware of my body, the sound of blood rushing through my veins, the movement of air in my lungs, the subtle shifts of organs and muscles. Around day 4, I noticed my sense of spatial awareness beginning to distort. The room would seem to expand and contract. Sometimes I felt I was in a vast cavern, other times in a space barely larger than a coffin. I would reach out to touch walls that should have been there and find only empty air, or bump into surfaces that I was sure were feet away. The first voice came on day 5. It wasn't dramatic, no ghostly whisper or demonic growl. It was so normal I initially thought the researchers were speaking to me through some hidden speaker. A woman's voice, elderly but clear, commenting on my posture as I sat on the bed. "You're slouching again," she said, "just like you did in Mrs. Henderson's 3rd grade class." The reference to my old teacher startled me more than the voice itself. I hadn't thought about Mrs. Henderson in decades, but once I started thinking about her, memories flooded back. Her floral dresses, the way she'd tap her red pen against her teeth while grading papers, how she smelled of peppermint and chalk dust. The voice came and went over the next few days, joined gradually by others. They would comment on my memories, initially sticking to things I could verify: childhood experiences, old friends, family events. But then they started knowing things I didn't. They knew about the conversation my parents had the night before they decided to divorce, a conversation I couldn't have heard because I was away at summer camp. They knew about my sister's secret abortion at 16, which she'd never told anyone about. They knew about the real reason my best friend from college had stopped speaking to me, a betrayal he'd never confronted me about. I tried to maintain my scientific perspective. These could be confabulations, my mind creating false memories to fill the sensory void. But the voices were too specific, too detailed, and as I later discovered, too accurate. They knew things that were verifiable, but that I couldn't possibly have known. By the end of the first week, the voices had begun to teach me things. They explained how human consciousness works. Not the simplified models we use in neuroscience, but the true complex reality of it. They showed me how our minds are not contained within our skulls, but extend outward, connecting to a vast network of consciousness that spans time and space. The vision started on day 9. Unlike the gradual onset of the voices, the first vision hit me with physical force. I was lying on my bed when suddenly I was somewhere else entirely, experiencing life as a young woman in Victorian London, walking down a gas-lit street in a rustle of petticoats. I could smell the coal smoke in the air, feel the tight pinch of my boots, hear the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones. It wasn't like watching a movie or even like dreaming. I was her, completely and totally, experiencing her thoughts and feelings as if they were my own. These episodes became more frequent and more intense. I lived countless lives. A soldier dying of gangrene in a Civil War field hospital. A child playing in the streets of ancient Rome. A woman giving birth in a medieval castle. A shaman performing rituals in a cave during the last ice age. Each experience was complete with sensory details, emotions and memories that felt as real as my own. The voices explained that these weren't hallucinations but actual memories, accessed through what they called the consciousness field, the underlying network that connects all human awareness across time and space. They told me that our individual personalities are like radio receivers, tuned to pick up only our own frequency. But in the darkness and silence, my mind had begun to pick up other channels. But it was what they told me about the observer that truly broke me. They first mentioned it on day 12, though they said it had been there all along. Once they pointed it out, I couldn't stop sensing it. A presence in the room, ancient and vast, watching with an intelligence that felt both alien and intimately familiar. They explained that this entity had always been there. Not just in the room, but everywhere, watching humanity through the cracks in our consciousness. It's what you might call God, one voice explained, but that's like calling the ocean a glass of water. Another voice added, it's the thing that dreams humanity into existence. A third voice, deeper and somehow older than the others, said, it's what lives in the silence between thoughts. The observer never spoke directly to me, but its presence became the center of my awareness. I could feel it studying me. Not with malice, but with an intense curiosity that felt like a physical pressure against my mind. The voices explained that it was drawn to these experiments, to these artificial gaps we were creating in the normal flow of human consciousness. By day 15, I began to understand why we keep ourselves constantly distracted with noise and activity. The voices showed me that what we call reality, our entire world of physical objects in linear time, is actually a defense mechanism, a way of organizing and limiting our awareness to protect us from the vast chaotic truth of existence. They showed me what lies beneath that protective layer. I saw the true nature of time, not a line, but a vast ocean in which past, present, and future exist simultaneously. I experienced consciousness as it really is, not individual minds but an interconnected web of awareness that spans all of humanity. I saw how our thoughts ripple through this web, affecting minds across time and space. The observer showed me things I still can't fully describe, concepts that human language isn't equipped to convey. I saw the birth and death of universes, the intricate dance of probability that underlies reality, the true nature of what we call space and time. I understood why certain people go mad from too much knowledge. The human mind isn't designed to contain these truths. By day 18, I was no longer sure which memories were mine and which belonged to other lives I'd experienced. My sense of self had become fluid, expanding to encompass countless other consciousnesses. The voices were no longer separate from my own thoughts. They had become part of a vast chorus of awareness that flowed through my mind. The breaking point came on day 19. The observer had drawn closer, its presence so intense that it felt like my mind was being pressed flat. The voices were speaking in languages I'd never learned but could somehow understand, revealing secrets about the nature of reality that made my brain feel like it was being torn apart. I pressed the emergency button, not out of fear, but because I realized I was on the verge of losing my humanity completely. I was beginning to understand things no human was meant to understand, seeing reality from a perspective that was fundamentally incompatible with continued existence as a human being. When they opened the door, the return of light and sound was almost lethal in its intensity. Every sensation felt like an assault. The lights burned through my closed eyelids. The sounds of human voices were like physical blows to my head. Dr. Chen was there, asking questions, but her words seemed primitive and limited after the vast communications I'd experienced in the darkness. The readjustment period was harder than the experiment itself. How do you return to normal life after experiencing the true nature of reality? How do you carry on everyday conversations when you know that what we call consciousness is just the thinnest surface of an unfathomable depth? The researchers were thrilled with the data they'd collected. My brain scans showed patterns they'd never seen before, areas of activity that shouldn't have been possible. My blood work revealed changes they couldn't explain. Dr. Chen talked excitedly about quantum entanglement, about consciousness as a field phenomenon, about breaking through the barriers of individual awareness. But I could see it in their eyes. They didn't really understand. They were looking for scientific explanations for something that transcended science itself. They thought they were conducting an experiment in sensory deprivation, but they were actually creating windows into a reality that our minds aren't equipped to process. I didn't tell them everything. How could I explain that their experiment had torn a hole in the fabric of what we call reality? How could I make them understand that they were playing with forces far beyond their comprehension? The observer had shown me what would happen if they continued their experiments. The 12 participants they planned to study, the gradual weakening of the barriers between individual consciousness, the thing that would eventually come through the gap they were creating. In the 2 years since the experiment, I've tried to return to normal life. I finished my PhD, though I completely changed my dissertation topic. I couldn't continue studying consciousness after what I'd learned. It felt like trying to understand the ocean by looking at a single drop of water. The voices are quieter now, but they never fully went away. They whisper to me in quiet moments, reminding me of what I learned in the darkness. I've learned to live with them, to find a balance between the limited awareness of normal human consciousness and the terrifying truth I glimpsed in that room. I keep track of the other participants, the ones who came after me. 3 have been committed to psychiatric institutions. 2 have disappeared completely. The others, I see their posts on obscure online forums asking if anyone else hears the voices, if anyone else remembers lives they never lived, if anyone else can sense the presence watching from the spaces between thoughts. Dr. Chen's research was shut down 6 months ago, after the incident with their 9th participant. The official report blamed equipment malfunction, but I know what really happened. The voices told me it would happen, that eventually someone would make contact with something that shouldn't be contacted. The observer isn't the only thing that watches us from the other side of consciousness. Sometimes late at night, when the city grows quiet and the distractions of daily life fade away, I can still feel it. That ancient presence, watching and waiting. In these moments, I understand why humans invented language, created art, built civilizations. Not to express ourselves, but to drown out the silence. Because in that silence, in the darkness between thoughts, something is waiting. Something that knows us better than we know ourselves. Something that has been watching us since the first human mind flickered into awareness. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I ever really left that room at all. The voices whisper that what I think of as my life now might just be another kind of dream. Another layer of illusion to protect me from the truth I glimpsed in the darkness. They might be right. After all, how can anyone be sure of anything? After learning that reality itself is just a comforting lie we tell ourselves to avoid facing what lurks in the silence between thoughts. But I keep the lights on anyway. And I never, ever let it get too quiet.